Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. This week I'm back with Rodney Hyde and Reality Check Radio to talk about the importance of focus. We talk about how to figure out saying yes or no when you're not sure what to do. With so many wonderful opportunities and requests made of you, it's easy to become overwhelmed. Rodney asks for some examples of what to include and how to choose, and many more important ideas are chatted over between us. I recommend Reality Check Radio for so many fascinating and matter-of-fact interviews, monologues, reviews, and how-tos. It's for anyone asking questions about the world around us and what's going on. You can find them at realitycheck.radio. Once again, I ask the favour of liking, sharing and subscribing to my channel. There is so much valuable content and homeschooling families need to know that it's there. Thank you. Time to listen to Rodney and me chatting over staying focused.
You're listening to Real Talk on RCR, Reality Check Radio.
You're on Reality Check Radio. It's Real Talk with Rodney Hyde. Remember, you can send us a text at 2057, email us inbox at realitycheck.radio. We got one of our favourites, our regulars, our homeschooling guru, Christine Smith. Good morning, Christine.
Good morning, Rodney. Nice to see you.
How do you always be so positive and happy and radiant?
Oh, I'm not always. But I do love life most of the time. Yeah. And try to remember good things about it and just really love life, especially as I get older.
I've noticed about Christians that they have an inner peace and joy about them that is worth having.
Yeah.
And if you live hedonistically, you can never get that, I don't think.
Well, the Bible talks about having the peace that passes understanding, so that even if your life you're in grief or there's chaos, you can still know peace in that. And I think that's like, I don't know, what do you call it? Like the magic sauce, if you like, the special sauce, the secret sauce of what it is to know God. It's really quite special, that peace.
Yes, and in my old days, I would have looked upon it as a delusion, a sort of happiness that comes from a delusion. And now I see it as so genuine and real and something so worth having. And you notice it with people that don't have it. It's a tough life they've made for themselves.
Well, you've got so much more to compare it to. For me, I kind of grew up in the faith. So like I've always known God. So although there have been times when I definitely know what it's like to rebel, if you like, I don't really have that experience of like an old life that can be compared to the wonderful new life.
Yeah, well, that's quite. I'm quite blessed in that regard because I can't get over how empty and meaningless it is, because you're basically stripped of everything, living just for yourself. You know, and you have your obligations with your work and your family, but there are a lot of sort of like obligations. It's just you decide what's good and right. You figure out what you should be doing, and there's no depth and I would go understanding. Your husband's helped me a lot because of his, what do you call it?
Apologetics.
Apologetics, and that deep intellectual understanding of Christianity that so enriches you, and you realize that the way Christianity, I thought of it, and the way it's painted and presented in modern culture is such a caricature. And you have some of the greatest thinkers ever having put their mind to it. And it's so rich and so deep in understanding and so pertinent to your life.
Mm.
So I got off on that because I was just reflecting how joyful you are. And it's so wonderful to see you in the morning. Your husband's a lucky man.
Oh, thank you.
We're talking homeschooling. And our topic for today is how do you keep yourself focused? Because life comes along, you get busy, and you got to stay focused on the big picture of homeschooling. How does that work?
It has to work, because otherwise you can become overwhelmed and disillusioned quite quickly. Because in most homeschooling communities, there are so many wonderful opportunities to participate in. You've got co-ops and different classes and activities and sports being organised. And because you want your child or your children to be involved in everything, you say yes to everything because it's there and you can. But that's not the best way to go ahead. It'll last for a little while, but you will become quite overwhelmed quickly. So there is some practical use to knowing what it is to stay focused and how to stay focused. So I thought we would talk about that today, because that was something that a young homeschooling mum asked me about, how to avoid the pitfalls of becoming unfocused or distracted, even though what you chose to do looked like good fun or useful at the time for your child. So we've introduced it, but it's like defining what that is, and then why it's important, and then how to actually go about implementing a methodology, if you like, to be able to stay focused. And I think that there's a paraphrased version from the book of Philippians, and St. Paul says, keeping your eye on the goal set before you, which ultimately is about, the goal of living Christianly and following Jesus. You're keeping your eye on the goal set before you. But Christians know that God is interested in everything they do, not just what you do on a Sunday. So it applies to homeschooling or whatever you do, because staying focused and how to go about making good decisions is for anyone's life, really. So we're going to apply that, keeping your eye on the goal set before you, to homeschooling today, and how to be focused. So, the shiny things come along and you want to go to them. The good causes come along, you're asked to participate or contribute something. And there's so many distractions that can distract you from your goal. So I suggest that we stop and do a mini audit regularly to assess, am I doing what I should be doing? But that presupposes that you already know what you're supposed to be doing. So we've talked about a why before in a previous interview. So going back to your why, because it's so easy to become more committed outside the home than what you intended, and what seems like a really good idea at the time needs to be measured against your why. So my first tip of the day is that if someone rings you up or approaches you and says, would you like to help, or would you like to come to something, and you're not totally sure, say, can I get back to you on that? And go back and think about it, because that person has come to you and they've already thought about it. They're already prepared, but you were taken by surprise. And you need to be able to assess quite clearly, is this invitation or opportunity fitting in with my purpose or my why? If it's very clear that it is, fine, go ahead and say yes. But if there's just a little smattering of doubt, it's a, can I get back to you, please? And then if you do go back to that person and say you can't do it, you turn it down. Second tip, there's no obligation to explain why. Just say, I'm really sorry, thanks for asking, but no, I won't be doing that. And, move on. So before you can decide whether you're going to say yes or no, you need to know what your baseline, your non-negotiables are. And I think that they are these. Everything asked of you is measured according to your why or your priorities. So for a Christian, it's God, your spouse, your children, and you. Your spouse needs the best of you and not your leftovers. Your extended family and close friends, because where do they fit in, are a priority, but after your spouse and your children. So once you've got those sorted out and you accept that that's your baseline, now you need to have your why super clear. So you need to sit down and write this out. And what is your goal? If you just say, well, I want my children to have a good education, that's a bit vague because you can fit any request or opportunity into that. Break it down more and more and more. Peel those layers back like the old onion until you can define what are your goals academically. What about in arts and sports? Write them down. How do you want to see the character of your child grow? If service opportunities, business skills, sports and dance are on your homeschooling list, where is their place in your calendar? Fill in those gaps. We've talked about masterly inactivity before, or the value of just giving time to a child just to be. That needs to be factored into your calendar. And you need to know your child's strengths, skills, weaknesses, and the things which must be learned. So you get all that written down, and already you can start to see you haven't got many gaps left in your calendar because your house and your property need you too. And you need your own space for quiet reflection and building into yourself and your career of homeschooling and motherhood and your own development. You haven't got many gaps left.
Give me an example, please.
Yes.
Of an academic sort of what you'd write down. How specific would you get for what you want them to achieve academically? Say, like, it's a specificity. Obviously saying, I want them to have a good education is too broad, but how specific would you get? Would you say something like, I want them to know their 12 times tables by December?
Absolutely. That would be a couple of layers in, if you like. So you could say they must learn their times tables. Great. Which ones? All of them? Some of them? How? Are you going to teach them by rote, or do you expect them to learn by just experience? Define how you're going to go about it. Then once you've done that, it's, well, how? Are you going to do it with a book? Are you going to do it with raps, a game, an app on the computer? So there's no guesswork left anymore, and you've now defined exactly how you say want to teach your times tables. And now you've got your other mathematics activities. So within maths, crossing over into everyday skills would be budgeting or understanding compound interest. They're all kind of within a... Now we're starting to see that within homeschooling, it's not so much in subject area. They just kind of coincidentally fall into a maths area. It's actually life. You're educating in life. So let's say you do want to talk about compound interest and what that means, the negative and the positive. It means, well, how are you going to teach them that? Now you'll have to learn yourself if you don't know already. How are you going to teach them how to budget? Well, you can't unless you're budgeting as well, so you might be learning alongside your child too, but they're vital things for your child to learn. They just coincidentally happen to fit into the category of maths. So
you are setting quite specific goals.
Yes, because the more specific your goals are, the easier it is for you to say yes or no to an opportunity or a request when something comes along. If they're very clear, the decision-making is quite easy, because to put it very simply, if the request doesn't fit into your specifically mapped out mission statement or why, then you can see it's a no.
My goodness, good for you. Whoa.
Yeah, so it's really quite a powerful tool, and now you can see how you can apply it in other areas of life too. So let's just suppose that a request comes along and it's actually a really, really good idea, but it doesn't fit inside your mission statement, if you like. well, maybe your mission statement needs to be updated a little bit. Treat it like it's a live document, because as life goes by and the children get older, and sometimes what you had written out in your theory, when the practicality and reality of everyday life starts, integrating together, sometimes the theory isn't quite working out. That's okay. It's a live document and it's yours. Go and update it.
It's so interesting because this is for life. I am a person who blunders along, and my little rule is just take every opportunity that presents itself. And so I've had rather an exciting time, but I never quite know what's next. My wife is a goal planner, right? And it's just what you're suggesting is a combination of the two, where you have your goals for your homeschooling exercise, but it's not rigid and stubborn, because you can amend it, you can adjust it. It does belong to you. And as opportunities or new ideas present themselves, you can amend it. But the discipline of having it written down, keeping you focused, and also having something that you can measure against, because otherwise you'd get to the end of the year and think, what did I achieve? But the great thing about my son couldn't do that a year ago. Now look at him. I get that.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful.
And so let me just put aside any assumption that I was able to successfully do this over the homeschooling years. By nature, my personality is one of a more relaxed nature at life. I'm not a naturally organized person. Everything I've learned about organization, I usually learned the hard way and through finding out good mentors and how to go about it. So I don't want listeners to kind of assume that I had it all together all of the time.
You're a superwoman.
I did not, no. But I do have the benefit of hindsight over many years. And if I can help the younger homeschoolers now bypass or short circuit some of the hard lessons I learned, well, yay, because that's just going to make their experience a whole lot better. So that we've done two of the how to decides. We've got define your purpose as succinctly as possible and write it down. And so when a request is made, check it. Secondly, is there time to fit this activity into your calendar, even if it does fit your purpose? So there's 3 criteria. That's number 2. The third one is, do you actually want to? Or do you feel obliged to the person asking, or because your child is asking to do another class? So there's, as far as I can see, there's 3 criteria that need to be met when you're trying to decide whether you're going to say yes or no to something. And they really need to have all 3 lined up. So I think that's
Because you start off homeschooling, I imagine, thinking you've got all this time to fill, and you haven't actually.
Well, do you know what? Some people think you've got a lot of time to fill. And so because you're at home all the time, therefore you've got time. If I just ask Christine to da-da-da-da-da, and they have no idea that your calendar is actually really full, they just assume that because you're at home and not working, you've got time. So you that's why you need to know what these things are, so that you can respond in grace when requests are made of you, that you just know you can't say yes to. And no is a perfectly acceptable answer to give to people, to yourself and to your children. The art of saying no. That's a good podcast in itself, isn't it, Rodney? The art of saying no. Okay. All right. So now you can see the importance of being able to decide in advance what classes, what sports, how many dance classes, your child is going to do at the beginning of the year. If you've got all that set in place, it becomes quite easy, and it lowers the stress level significantly.
Can I ask a query off topic?
Please.
You mentioned about with your child, you know their strengths, you know their weaknesses.
Yes.
So let's imagine academically they have an area where they're weak on, and they have an area where they're strong on. How do you conceptually approach that? Do you say, look, they're not strong over here, we'll do a little bit, but it's not really their thing, and concentrate on their strengths? Or do you hone in on the weakness and say, I need to bring them up to speed? I imagine it depends what sort of weakness it is. Obviously, if they have a weakness for mathematics, you've got to lift them to a certain level. If they have a weakness in art, you can say, oh, well, they're not very arty, I'll forget that. How do you approach that conceptually, their weaknesses and their strengths?
Well, it's in your mission statement, because it's your job description to make sure that you educate your child in every sphere you possibly can according to their giftings and their weaknesses. So it's a given that that's in your why. Nobody else in the world knows your child like the parents do. So you've got front row seats, if you like, in the life of your child. You know from very early on what their weaknesses are, what their strengths are, and their giftings. So you recognize those, and they're different in each child. I'm just thinking through the range of our 5 children. Some math wasn't their thing. It was never going to be their thing. But you need to know your times tables. You need to know and understand budgeting and basic finance. You need to be able to stand in the supermarket and look at what's on special and know, is 20% off a better deal than $2 off? And you need to be able to do it without a calculator. So there's a very basic level in maths that it's I think you're harming your child if you don't make sure that even the person who is not big on maths doesn't have those basic capabilities in life, because that's going to affect their entire adulthood down the track. And I know it's a very quick diversion and I won't focus on it for long, but I have a good friend who actually left teaching at a local high school here, one of the biggest in the country, absolutely disillusioned by the time the children are coming through into their high school years, what they don't know in maths. And year after year after year, the teacher from their previous year has just kind of like nursed them through, passed them on to the next year. And they're leaving school functionally enumerate, and that's just maths, because they're leaving school functionally illiterate as well. I won't go down there because it's you. Yeah, that's a topic for another day. But that's your goal as a homeschool parent or schooling parent, because you understand what you're doing. I'm not saying this is the domain just of the homeschooling family. It's your job to make sure your child is educated in those necessaries of life, not the schools. So that's the maths. So let's say she's not so hot on maths, but she's an amazing reader and she can write brilliantly. Fantastic. That's what you're going to grow into the very, very best she can be, because that's her giftings. Now, what if your son is a whiz at maths and science, finds it easy and loves it, bless him, but finds reading really difficult? It's really, really important that he knows how to sound out words if he's having trouble reading and recognizing words. So it's your job to spend extra time focusing on how to teach him what he doesn't understand about how to read, because you know your other children, it just, came to them like that. They don't need that kind of help, but he does. He needs to know his word attack skills, how to see a word, how to sound it out and figure it out, because the look-see method doesn't work for him. Doesn't work for many kids, actually. So he needs to know basics in reading and writing, how to actually hold a pen or a pencil and write, as well as typing on the keyboard, because he's going to need those going into life. Doesn't matter whether he loves reading or he doesn't. He's going to need to read. It's your job. You're the parent. He needs to know that. So that's how you do it in a very kind of rough approach. It's already in your goal, your mission statement. Now it's up to you to decide succinctly as possible how you're actually going to do it. Once you've got your what and your why sorted out, the how just slips in.
Very important to have those statements day one. Very important to be adjusting them. Very important to be auditing them. I can see that.
Yes.
Also very hard to do because you just blunder along sometimes.
Well, I think when it's easy to blunder along in your own life, but when it's your children, you have
Oh,
this
yeah.
enormous sense of responsibility of
And the clock's ticking,
yeah,
and then, whoa, they're there out
yeah.
in the world and there's a gap.
Mm. I can also just pop in here an important thing that I've got here highlighted, that as a homeschooling mum, because most of the homeschoolers are mums, but if you're the father, fine, make sure you include your husband or your spouse in all of the choices that you're making. He might not be coming to the co-op or the class or the sports practice, and he's not at the coalface of your everyday homeschooling, but he is my main cheerleader. He's my provider and protector. So listen to what he says, and make sure I get time to drop in before the end of this chat, Rodney, my own particular story of regret. If I could go back and change something, this is it. So make sure we we have time for that story. Yes. All right. Now, anything else you want to ask me about what we've...
No, carry on. You're doing great.
Okay. All right then. All right. So let's say that you've accepted the decision. It all worked out. It ticked all your boxes. So off you go to this co-op, and it's going great. But people being people mean that sometimes politics or clashes can happen within a group, personality clashes, etc. Now, on one hand, these are actually really good learning experiences for a child. But if the behavior of children or other parents there are affecting stress levels to an unhelpful level, and you will be the best judge of that, you're going to need to do something about it. So is it something like, do the standards that you have, I assume, already set out for your co-op or your homeschooling group need to be revisited and reminded? If how a group started out isn't how it's turning out, maybe it's being hijacked with other people, or maybe some children aren't particularly well behaved. It's time to think clearly about stepping back. Sorry, it's time to think about stepping back and thinking clearly about, do I stay in this group? Do I try and instigate change? Or is it actually the most wisest thing to do is to just to leave this? And that's a whole other decision process you have to go through, because you chose this class or this team because it did fit your criteria. And now all of a sudden it's not fitting it. Now what are you going to do? So I did do a podcast on that. It's number 78, and it came about because a long-term homeschooling parent expressed concern that because of the COVID debacle, there were a lot of new joiners coming into the group, but they were bringing with them, and they weren't used to homeschooling, we'll say. So they brought in the behavior of what would typically be amongst schooled children into a homeschool group that just wasn't used to that. And all of a sudden there's this clash of cultures happening in there.
Yes.
And it was, well, what do we do about this? On one hand, we're supposed to be inclusive and loving and inviting, but on the other hand, it's starting to affect our children and the parents, because some of the parents didn't understand what their responsibilities. You're not delegating anymore. You've actually brought your kids home, but they would leave their kids there and just let the other adults start to parent their kid, not intervene when there was behavioral issues. So that's how that issue came about. And I dealt with that in a previous podcast, number 78, if I haven't already said that, just to help
Just
guide.
remind us again how we find your podcast.
Oh, thank you, Rodney. On YouTube, Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling.
Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in
Right.
Homeschooling.
Yeah.
And they're viewed around the world, right?
Yes.
You're very famous.
I wish I was more famous, not because that sounds dreadfully boastful, but because there's so much good content in there.
Yeah.
If I could just get more homeschool families seeing some of the support and encouragement that they could get from it, I'd be absolutely delighted. That's my goal. Get the message out. I'm here to serve people. All right, shall I tell you about my story of regret?
Please.
Yeah, which again is going to reinforce if everybody thinks I didn't put a step wrong. Oh, how wrong you are. Okay, here we go. So my friend, when I met her a month or so ago, said, well, do you have any regrets, Christine? And I said, oh, yes. There's the little ones. Everybody you can't get through life without having regrets. It's just the nature of being human. But here's my whopper. I co-owned a business, which was a good idea at the time, with a fellow homeschooling friend. But as time went by, it was clear that it was taking up too much time. And I knew so many times as I was leaving the house and my older children to go to this, my business commitments, that I knew I should have been at home with them. It was just out of balance, badly out of balance. I wish I hadn't cared more about what my friend thought of me than what was most important for my family. I wish I had been courageous and stuck to my priorities. And I wish I'd taken more notice of my husband's concerns. Eventually, we did sell the business, but I wish we'd done it so much sooner. There we are. That's my story. That's something I would change if I could.
I think every person in a family has those regrets because your family is around you and therefore so readily taken for granted.
Yes.
And the new shiny thing out there is the thing you strive for because you take your family for granted too readily. And it's the same when you look back over the opportunities that you have with your children. You think at the time it goes on forever and you can be frustrated and annoyed. And then you look back and you realize you just had this instant with them. And how could you ever get annoyed or frustrated with a child, because soon they're gone. They're grown up. Not gone, but not that cute little thing or what they were. You just can't imagine when you're busy with kids that next year they'll be that much older.
That is so true. And forgiveness is an amazing thing, both seeking it from your family, forgiving yourself, because we are inclined to focus on what we did wrong or our regrets and beat ourselves up a lot. And that's not a healthy thing. And I actually did a podcast this week, and it was based on, we went to the Dire Straits experience over, the weekend, and just very, very quickly, I actually, looking out over the audience, was just starting to think, wow, it was 45 years since that group came out. And here are all of these older people down there now. And if I could go back into each of their lives, how did life work out for you? What are your regrets? What would you do if you could do it all over again? And I focused on that for a while. And then I came out at the other end and said, but I still have X amount of years left. What am I doing now with my life?
Yes.
And this is part of what I'm doing is serving the homeschooling community, because it's something I can do. I can do this productively and be of assistance to people who need it. And that's a great thing to do in my latter years. And no matter what our regrets are, we still have today, we still have tomorrow. Get up,
Indeed.
Dust yourself off, and keep going.
And it's very easy to downplay the benefits of experience. And that's what, as you get older, you have an amazing amount of. And I can't stand this modern world where we disrespect older people, because it's just that wonderful experience of life that they have lived. And it's all the me young ones. And it's fantastic to be young. of course. But I liked it when we listened and respected uncles and granddads and grandmas, because you learned such a lot off them. And if we all regret, speaking of regret, that we didn't talk to them more.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And ask them questions more. My dad didn't read or write much, but in his latter years, he wrote down his memories. And it's so wonderful. Right? It's just a few pages. But it would have been everyday things. Like, I'd never think to write down my memories. But he just wrote it down, and I have it. And like, he can remember when electricity arrived in their community, when they went from horses to tractors.
Wow.
And I mean, it's such a thing, right?
Yeah.
It is such a thing. And that, with my kids, you're watching a movie and it's set back a little while, and they pick up a telephone. It's got a wire attached to it, to a box. And they say, "What the hell is that?"
How to know you're old. Yes.
Or the other one was, it was a movie we're watching, and they were at breakfast reading the newspaper.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't know what that was.
Mm.
They didn't know what a newspaper was.
Yes. Yes.
Christine, you're such a delight. Tell us that how to find your podcasts again.
YouTube.
Yeah.
Coming Home, Survive and Thrive.
YouTube, Coming Home, Thrive and Survive. And tell us about the podcast. I'm homeschooling, love what I'm hearing from you, would like to gain off your experience. What are the podcasts about?
Everything from how to get started if you've got toddlers, so forming a homeschooling mindset, you're not waiting till a child is 5, right through to how to get them out of high school at the end and into uni if you want to, and everything in the middle, from the very basics of how to choose good books, talking about educational approaches. I interview experienced homeschoolers. I've got interviews with adult homeschooled folk, and reflections, a lot of reflections on parenting, because homeschooling is just parenting in the end. And yeah, there's very little in there now that I actually haven't got.
Wow.
And
can I scroll through it and find what I need?
Yes, the titles are hopefully quite helpful. If you're having trouble, Christine, have you got such and such? Because there's 130 odd videos now. I ain't got time. That's bad English. I don't have time to filter through everything and look for something. Can you please tell me what to look for if I want something on I'm struggling with depression, or I'm struggling with how to teach budgeting? Just tell me where to go. I can do that. And if there's not something there that you need, ask me. I'd love to know, because I'd love to do a podcast on it.
There you go. Once again, YouTube, tell us the name.
Coming Home, Survive and Thrive.
There you go. That's Christine Smith, our homeschooling lady. I won't say guru, because I don't think she'd accept the word, because we're all learning on this one. Mm-hmm. Christine, wonderful to have you along. You're on Real Talk with Rodney Hyde, Reality Check Radio. Send us a text at 2057. Email us at inbox@realitycheck.radio. We're truly blessed with our guests, are we not?
From caps to tees and bags to bumper stickers, we have you covered. Visit www.realitycheck.radio/shop.